But the fact remains that the rare scientific articles mentioned more or less explicitly in the text do fit with the current understanding of science. And that is quite amazing if you think of a book that was written more than 1400 years ago. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So in the third chapter, the Islamic paradigm, and now I'm trying to see the correspondence between what the Qur'an teaches and what I understand from the world scientifically, and to see if it matches. So section B, nature as described in the Qur'an. So because I assume that ultimately both science and religion have the same source, Allah, God, I intuitively expect the Quranic description of the physical world to coincide with scientific interpretations. In this section, I'll thus go through some of the common Quranic references to natural phenomena and evaluate their relevance to modern scientific understanding. This is because the Qur'an does call for scientific inquiry. So unlike the Europeans during the Enlightenment, who developed technologically and prospered technologically by opposing science and religion, the Muslim civilization distinguished itself by marrying both science and religion. There was no such separation. So the Qur'an, which serves as the ideological reference for the Islamic civilization, makes many calls to search for knowledge, use intellect, observe and ponder over the natural world. So you'll have a few verses that even requires you to do so. In these passages, Allah invites, even challenges mankind to engage in scientific pursuit, each at its own level, of course. Not everyone must be scientist, but everyone should ponder on what this world means. This in order to learn about Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, however, it is important to remember that the primary purpose of the Qur'an is to guide mankind. That the Qur'an is a book of morality, of morals and salvation, and not a scientific textbook. If you think a scientific textbook is extremely reductionist, a scientific textbook is organized in chapters, in topics. It forces you to compartmentalize knowledge, to distinguish between, okay, this is biology, this is chemistry, this is mathematics, this is physics. And then within each field, this is high energy physics, this is astronomy, and so on. So the way we learn science through these textbooks forces you to separate these different aspects of life. The Qur'an doesn't. On the contrary, the Qur'an put them together and say, no, you should be able to see a unified mesh across all these fields. So the Qur'an speaks primarily to the heart, not only to the scientific mind. Primarily to the heart, yes, but also to scientists. But not only to scientists. So you cannot expect the Qur'an to be a scientific textbook. As a consequence, it must be borne in mind that the language of the Qur'an is often poetic and hyperbolic, which reflects actually the language of the Arabs in the 6th century. Moreover, it should be borne in mind that the Qur'an was initially addressed to an Arab population that lived far away from intellectual centers of the neighboring empires. Like you can imagine, you have Central Arabia, and miles away you have established civilization, the Sassanid Empire, the Byzantine Empire. So one can understand that in order to remain intelligible to someone who lives far away from these centers of knowledge and of civilization, like local tribes, you cannot talk in terms of science, or even philosophy. The few scientific descriptions in the Qur'an are often figurative, personified, leading then to multiple levels of interpretations. But the fact remains that the rare scientific articles mentioned more or less explicitly in the text do fit with the current understanding of science. And that is quite amazing if you think of a book that was written more than 1400 years ago, that it's still relevant. It can still be made relevant today, scientifically relevant. So I'll go through just one example for this video, inshallah. So the first one is the creation of the universe and the standard model, like standard model of the universe. How does the universe came to being and how does it work? The Qur'an indicates that the heavens and the earth have a common origin, the source of which is a smoke, type of smoke, dukhan, that expanded. And the Qur'an says, yes, the heaven and the earth were joined in an entity and we separated them. In another verse you have the heaven was made, that he directed himself to the heavens while he was smoke, like a dukhan. In another verse you have the heavens were constructed with strength and indeed we are the expander. So these series of events correspond actually to the current standard model, like our current understanding on how the universe came to being. That standard model suggests that the universe originated primarily from dense and hot gas, which you can understand as dukhan. After expansion and cooling, this soup of energy allowed for the formation of diverse particles that were then aggregated to give the current stars, including the sun and the other celestial bodies, like all the planets, including the earth. It is also specified that the creation of the heaven and the earth was done in 6 days. The verse is then clarified by saying that a day for Allah can be equated to thousands of our years. Another passage in the Qur'an indicates that a day for Allah can equal maybe 50,000 years. So these days, obviously, can thus be referring to stages with no apparent restriction on their duration. So these stages can then refer to either the epochs of the Big Bang Theory or the eons or the geological eras, etc. So just to conclude in that example, when the Qur'an describes the universe, it's oftentimes ambiguous, not that specific enough, just enough to echo certain concepts, but not enough to distinguish between two different interpretations. So what I find beautiful here is that you can take the same verse and imagine as a young earth creationist Christian that God created in 6 days, 6 24-hour days, the universe. But you can also read this text, the same verses, with a modern understanding of the standard model of the universe and still make sense of the same verse. It's like you can have two different views of the world, two different worldview, and still make sense of the same initial verse. Why? Because the verse is the Arabic language is flexible enough to accommodate different levels of interpretations. That I find quite miraculous. It doesn't mean that you can read anything through the text. No, the Qur'an still specifically talks about heaven, earth, dukhan, and other entities. It's just that you can relate these to different worldviews. So I see the Qur'an through that ambiguity, careful, I would say, and planned ambiguity, that it stays relevant across the ages, 1400 years ago, as well as today. وجزاك الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.